Yeah, there ain't no coincidence on this one. On the very day, a few hours after this big Ngannou to PFL announcement, Dana goes live on Instagram. And as soon as you see that, you know it's going to be good. But Dominic, I am still blown away by what we got. And that's the whole fight announcements portion for today. Usually fight announcements is sort of after the cards and stuff. No, no, no. Dana announced the entire pay-per-view for July 29th in Salt Lake City, Utah. Dominic, your main event for UFC 291 in Salt Lake City, Utah, the BMF title is back. It was apparently vacated when one Jorge Masvidal walked away from the sport. He retired. So because of that, we need a new BMF champion, apparently. So for your 5 round main event, we'll see Dustin Poirier take on Justin Gaethje in a highly anticipated rematch. Co-main event, we are getting the light heavyweight debut of Alex Pereira, and he's taking on the only other man to beat Israel Adesanya in MMA, Jan Blachowicz, the Polish power, is back. Then, Dominic, Paulo Costa is in your feature bout. Nope, he's not fighting Hamzat in Abu Dhabi like we've been hearing for months. He's fighting Ikram Aliskerov, a man who just made his UFC debut at the last pay per view. Then you have Tony Ferguson, which I, I mean, I don't know if I should be surprised, but this is just a week after he was making some pretty negative headlines in his personal life. He's taken on Bobby Green, who I think is now going by King. So maybe we just have to call him King now. I think he's changing his name or something like that. Anyways, to open our pay per view card, how about Michael Chiesa? We were talking about him a little bit. He'd been looking for a fight. He's taking on loudmouth Kevin Holland in the opener. And Dominic, that's not all, because Dana threw in a couple of prelims as well. At one time, this was supposed to be our co main event for the Vancouver card coming up in June. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson and Michelle Pereira will now be on your prelims of UFC 291, if that doesn't tell you anything about the quality here. And finally, at elevation, you're getting the Black Beast Derek Lewis taking on Marcos Rogerio de Lima. Whew. Okay. I feel like I'm at elevation, Dominic. A big guy like me, I'm not supposed to be talking that much in a row. I mean, Jesus. So that's 7 fights right there, Dominic. What are you thinking here? Like, because I don't know if this is all good stuff, but it's a lot of stuff.
That's a really good quote there, I think, Noah. So, I mean, where do we begin? At first, all I saw was Gaethje Poirier 5 rounds, and I'm like, yes, please. I didn't even realize it was for the BMF belt until I looked at a little deeper. I investigated the graphics, and I'm like, oh, alrighty then, that's happening too. I mean, I don't really care about the belt; it's whatever. But the fight itself, that's what we've been calling for. That's the fight that makes sense for both of those guys. It's a sick main event. It's a sick rematch. 5 rounds between those two at elevation. Keep in mind, people, Justin Gaethje does train in Colorado. He's a bit more experienced with that than Dustin Poirier is. So if we get a 5 round war, that could be interesting, something to monitor. But I mean, dude, like I'm not even going through a name of my favorites. I feel like I just have to touch on something on all of these almost. Like Blachowicz Pereira, that's awesome. Sign me up. I think that's a perfect welcoming for Alex. Jake Moore, our buddy, was talking about how it's all part of Alex's grand scheme to go beat the only other guy that's ever beaten Adesanya. I mean, Paulo
Yeah, that
fighting
was a great
Ikram.
observation by him.
Yeah, yes, it was. Paulo and Ikram is like so random, but apparently the UFC is full bore on Ikram because if he goes in and beats Paulo Costa, I mean, hello, welcome to the elite of middleweight and just your second UFC fight. Tony and Bobby Green is sick. Somehow those guys have managed to never fight each other. Chiesa Holland, I actually low key really, really like that one. I think that's a really fun matchup. Chiesa ain't fought in a while. Kevin Holland looking to get into the rankings a bit deeper. we've already kind of talked about Thompson and Pereira when it got announced a while ago. Derek Lewis and Marcos shouldn't last long, and for their sake, they probably hope it doesn't, because as Noah said, it is at altitude that could be very sloppy if it goes longer than one round. I mean, there's nothing that I necessarily dislike. There's definitely random shit for sure, but I mean, sign me up. Something's in the water at Salt Lake City, Utah, I guess.
Nothing bad ever happens in Utah.
Yeah, what the fuck, man? This is at Salt Lake City. I mean, you look at last year's card, like, yeah, you had the Usman rematch with Leon Edwards, and that ended up being a massive moment and an all timer. Now Leon, of course, the champion. But you looked at the rest of that card, Dominic, and it was kind of weak. And I'm saying weak in the kind of on the scale of UFC pay per views. A lot of good stuff on there, but you get my point. Here, I mean, this almost feels like too much, Dominic. I don't know what we did to deserve this. That's what I'm sort of sitting there saying. Um, but apparently, I just need. You know what we need? That we just need Francis to keep making big announcements, because the more he does, if that means we're getting more shit like this, then I'm all about it. But no, that main event's perfect. I was hoping they would make it 5 rounds, whether it been a fight night main event, obviously not at the Apex, a pay per view main event. You don't need the BMF title on this. Like, you don't need the BMF title. Am I mad that they're putting the BMF title on this? No, because I don't know. It's something. Like, I wasn't mad at it when Masvidal fought Diaz. I actually think the physical belt kind of makes it feel uncool. Like, I thought the whole Diaz Masvidal build where they were talking about being the BMF and stuff was really cool until they brought the belt in. And then you had The Rock in there, which I loved because I grew up being a wrestling fan. But, like, what does The Rock have to do with being a BMF? Like, if you were going to have the BMF from WWE come over to hand the belt off, wouldn't you get someone like Stone Cold Steve Austin? I don't know. But regardless, um, that's that's my rant on the BMF. I'm fine with it. It's cool, but I'm just glad it's 5 rounds and it's Poirier Gaethje. The fight's gonna deliver. We know it will. And that co-main event, you know, this is an interesting one, Dominic, and I do really like it as a debut for Pereira, but it's not an easy fight for Pereira, like, at all. As we mentioned, Blachowicz is the only other guy to beat Adesanya. So with a guy like Pereira, I think a lot of people are going to come in here expecting Blachowicz to similar use similar tactics to beat Pereira as he did Izzy. But I will just say, to combat that, Pereira much bigger naturally than Adesanya, a much more natural light heavyweight. So while Blachowicz had a great game plan to utilize strength and his overall size advantage on Adesanya, it may not work against Pereira. It may. He still will have that wrestling advantage and be able to potentially take down Pereira, who we know is, there's room for improvement on that takedown defense, but it's just a matter of getting it there before he's out cold, because we know what Pereira is going to be capable of doing at 205 pounds. Paulo Costa, Ikram Aliskerov, weird one. But Dominic, you want to know what it reminds me of? How about Sean Strickland fighting a literal big yellow bus on July 1st? So this begs the question, why didn't Paulo Costa get matched up with Sean Strickland and Abbas Magomedov get matched up with Ikram Aliskerov? This tells me, Dominic, the UFC are desperate, or at least see the need for fresh contenders at middleweight. I mean, they're really putting all their chips into these guys to potentially make a big statement here, and then you're looking at like one fight or 2 fights away from a title. They really want to try to flesh out the future of the middleweight division, which, hey, I'm here for. I think it's an interesting move. I think it's a bit risky to put guys like Ali Skarov and Magomedov, who look very talented and very good, but haven't fought the kind of competition that most would need to take on Apollo Costa or whoever, Sean Strickland. But it is interesting that they're going this direction, and it does make the fight very intriguing, because it's like it makes me think, Dominic, what do they know that we don't? Like, what did they know about Ali Skarov? Like, yes, he looked great against Phil Halls, but what do they know? They must think this dude's going to be an absolute stud. Same thing I thought of when they put Abbas Magomedov against Sean Strickland. It's like, what do they know that we don't? It's like what I say when Vegas puts certain odds out that look like super inflated and ends up being a rat line. I'm like, what do they know that we don't? What do they know? So that's what I'm doing here with this matchup. So of course I'm going to be invested. Oh God, man, so many fights. I mean, Tony Ferguson, Bobby Green is fun. It could be sad, but I hope for it to be fun. Michael Chiesa, Kevin Holland is a great fight. I have no complaints about that one. I have no complaints about Wonderboy Thompson and Michelle Pereira. I mean, that's a great prelim headliner. Are you kidding me? That's a great one for that. I mean, this is Stephen Thompson, a man who's fought for the welterweight title multiple times in his career. And then Derek Lewis, Marcos Rogerio de Lima. Those boys are going to be preparing for 5 rounds or less, or else the pizza's free because they ain't making it. They ain't making it to the bell, Dominic. They ain't doing it. It ain't happening. As a fellow big guy myself, I know damn well if I'm in Salt Lake City, Utah, my ass is using those scooters to get everywhere. I ain't fucking walking. So